My name is Gwen. For the last 18 years, I was the Senior Human Resources Specialist at Barlow Manufacturing, a place where I knew every hallway, every policy, every face. That morning, when I walked into my office and saw my nameplate gone, it felt like someone had erased me from my own story. Kara was standing by the window when I entered, arms crossed, confidence pouring off her like cologne. She had just been promoted to Vice President of People Operations. 3 years ago, she was the fresh-faced intern I mentored. Now, she barely met my eyes as she handed me the envelope. It wasn't a conversation. It was a decision. My role was being restructured, effective immediately. I would now manage the mailroom team in the lower level, where we store old employment records and inter-office deliveries. No performance review. No warning. Just a memo and a new badge with a different floor code. I sat there, gripping the envelope, the buzz of her words still ringing in my ears. She called it a realignment, said it was about modernization and agility. The company was pivoting. I was legacy. That was the word she used, legacy. There was a photo on the corner of my old desk, my team, and at the 10-year service awards. I remembered standing beside Kara, helping her pick out the right blazer for her first real presentation. I coached her on difficult conversations, covered her mistakes when she fumbled exit interviews, and even gave up my seat on a panel so she could get exposure. She never once thanked me that day. She didn't even ask if I was okay. I walked out of that office like a ghost. People I'd worked with for over a decade avoided eye contact. No one asked where I was going. I guess they'd already heard. The elevator ride down to the basement was the longest 45 seconds of my career. When the doors opened, it smelled like dust and old toner cartridges. I stood there a minute, letting the fluorescent lights buzz into my bones. So this was it. 18 years of loyalty, late nights, reorganizations, layoffs, and hand-holding through every kind of crisis. And this was where it ended. In a windowless room beneath the cafeteria, filed neatly between forgotten memos and toner orders. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat at my new desk, stared at the blank wall, and tried to remember who I was before I became invisible. Before Kara. Before the endless years of being the one people relied on, but never really saw. Maybe I should have fought back then. Maybe I should have said something when she handed me that envelope. But I didn't. Because some part of me still believed she would come to her senses, that she'd realize what she'd done. She never did. And that was the moment I knew. Whatever came next, I'd have to build it myself, brick by brick. I still remember the first time Kara walked into the office. She had a nervous smile, a crisp portfolio clutched in both hands, and shoes that clearly hadn't been broken in. The hiring manager paired her with me because I had a reputation for being patient with new hires. And Kara needed a soft landing. She was fresh out of college, all theory and no practice. But there was something in her eyes that reminded me of my younger self. Eager, unsure, and desperate to prove she belonged. I took her under my wing from day one. Showed her how to navigate the unwritten rules of the company. Which battles were worth picking. And how to send a firm but respectful follow-up email. She'd stumble, apologize, and I'd reassure her that mistakes were part of the process. I gave her small wins to build her confidence, let her shadow my calls, and even shared my notes from difficult negotiations so she could understand the nuance. She soaked it all up like a sponge. When a project came up that involved presenting to the VP of Operations, I was the obvious choice. But I recommended Kara instead. Told management it was time for someone younger to take the lead, that she had potential worth betting on. She was terrified, but I stood beside her every step of the way, rehearsing slides after hours, and writing talking points she never knew came from me. The presentation was a success, and people started noticing her. She moved quickly after that. Promotion to HR coordinator. Then the team lead. Each time, I backed her. Defended her in meetings, when others questioned her approach. Quietly fixed errors she missed. I even passed on a leadership development program because it was down to one seat, and I knew it would mean more for her career than mine. I thought I was paying it forward. There was never a part of me that expected anything in return. Not recognition, not credit. Just the quiet satisfaction of watching someone grow. Kara used to leave thank you notes on my desk, sometimes with a sticky bun from the cafe downstairs. She called me her work mom once. I smiled at that. I didn't know how temporary it all was. Looking back, I think that was the hardest part, not that she rose, but that I never saw the distance growing until the day she let it break. The email came in just after lunch. Kara had been promoted to Vice President of People Operations, effective immediately. I stared at the announcement, reading it 3 times before I could move. It wasn't that she got the job. It was that I hadn't even been considered. No conversation, no warning, just a decision handed down like I didn't exist. There was a team meeting that afternoon. Kara walked in wearing a sharp blazer I hadn't seen before, all smiles and buzzwords. She thanked the leadership team, spoke about transformation, innovation, and restructuring. I waited for a nod, some mention of the people who helped her get there. My name never came up. Then she laid out her plan. A full department reorg, new reporting lines, redundancies eliminated. My title disappeared from the chart like it never existed. She said my experience was valuable and that she'd found a position where it could be best utilized. Mailroom manager. It wasn't just a demotion. It was erasure. I couldn't even speak. My throat closed up. Around me, no one met my eyes. I trained half the people in that room, helped them through layoffs, family emergencies, and performance crises. I had been the one they leaned on, and now they watched me get sidelined without a word. After the meeting, Kara came over, voice low, like she was doing me a favor. She told me she fought to keep me on staff, saying this was the best way to preserve my legacy. I almost laughed. Legacy doesn't live in a basement beneath the server room. She placed a hand on my arm. It was the same gesture I used to use when she doubted herself. That touch used to mean trust. Now it just felt hollow, like everything I'd believed about our connection had been rewritten while I wasn't looking. I walked back to my desk that day in a fog. Packed up my things while people averted their gaze. I kept wondering if I'd missed something. Some signal. Some sign that this was coming. But the truth hit me hard. I had been a stepping stone. She just forgot to thank the stone once she reached the next level. The mailroom sat 2 floors below the cafeteria, tucked behind the janitor's supply closet and a forgotten vending machine. The lights flickered when I flipped the switch, casting a pale yellow over metal shelves and dusty bins. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that didn't invite thought, but forced it. My new desk was a folding table pushed against the wall. No windows, no artwork, just a phone that never rang and a chair that creaked every time I shifted. I stared at the walls for a long time that first morning, trying to convince myself this was temporary, that it didn't matter, but it did. There's something strange about going from a space where people sought your advice to one where they forgot you existed. Upstairs, I had meetings, decision-making power, and a nameplate. Down here, I had a clipboard and a box cutter. People dropped packages off like I was part of the furniture. They barely looked at me. I started sorting the backlogs just to have something to do. Old HR files, outdated training manuals, and onboarding checklists with my handwriting on them. One binder was still labeled in my neat, blue ink scrawl from a decade ago. Gwen's 2012 policy notes. I sat with it in my lap for a while, fingers brushing over the worn cover like it was an artifact from another life. Each folder I opened was a reminder of how much I used to matter. Performance reviews I'd written, disciplinary notes I'd softened, retention proposals I'd fought for late into the night. Back then, I believed every form I signed helped build something that lasted. But those papers were down here now, like me, filed away. I found a yellow sticky note still stuck to one of the pages. It said, "You saved me today." Kara's handwriting. I closed the file without reading further. Some memories are better left untouched. There was a coffee ring on the corner of my new desk, from someone who'd worked this space before me. I added one next to it, a small mark of my own. No one noticed, but it made me feel real again, like I still existed in this place, even if only in a quiet, unseen way. The days were long, but the silence grew familiar. I wasn't sure if that scared me more than the demotion itself. Maybe this was what being forgotten felt like. Not a sudden erasure, but a slow fade. I used to be the one people turned to in a crisis. Now, I was the woman in the basement with the binders. Still, there was something comforting about the paper. It held history, truth. The things people upstairs liked to pretend didn't matter anymore. But I knew better. I always had. It started with a misfiled folder labeled Senior Leadership Contracts. I wasn't even supposed to be reviewing that section until next week, but the rows were out of order, and something about the misplacement bothered me. I pulled the binder down, dust puffing into the air, and flipped through the familiar signatures and structured pages I had written years ago. I recognized my own formatting immediately. The spacing between sections, the way I phrased conditions. There was comfort in that, like seeing your own footprints in freshly laid snow. Then, I saw it, buried on page 6 of the Executive Transition Agreement template. Section 14.2. I read the clause once, then again, slower. It stated that any significant changes to roles within the executive tier, including promotions, terminations, and structural realignment, required a countersignature from the original HR author of the contract. In this case, that author was me. The clause wasn't standard. I'd written it myself during a company merger 7 years ago, to protect long-standing leadership agreements from hasty restructuring. I sat very still. The hum of the old mailroom fan filled the silence. My fingers trembled slightly as I turned to the next file. It had the same clause. So did the third. And the fourth. Every executive contract I'd been responsible for drafting over the past decade included a nearly identical paragraph, each tying major decisions back to me. I had forgotten I'd done this. Back then it was about accountability and institutional memory. I never imagined it would one day become leverage. But here it was. Legal, enforceable, quietly waiting in a box no one thought to look inside. Kara had no idea. She had rewritten half the org chart. She had likely already told several people they were being replaced. And yet, without my signature, those changes were in violation of binding agreements. The consequences wouldn't just be internal. They could trigger penalties, lawsuits, or even severance renegotiations. I leaned back in the rickety chair, letting the weight of it settle. I had power, not because I demanded it, not because I fought for it, but because I did my job so thoroughly, with so much care. The system still recognized my value, even when the people didn't. That was the moment something shifted in me. I didn't feel bitter. I felt awake. The basement didn't seem so dim anymore. I wasn't buried. I was planted. And now, I was starting to grow back through the cracks. The auditorium was packed. Every department head, every team lead, even a few senior staff who rarely showed up for all-hands meetings, had found a seat. The buzz in the room felt electric, like something important was about to drop. I stood in the back, near the exit, barely noticed among the crowd. Kara took the stage with practiced ease. Her new title gleamed on the projector screen behind her. She smiled widely, thanked the board for their confidence, and then launched into what she called the Future Forward Initiative. A bold, sweeping transformation of the HR division and, by extension, the entire company's workforce structure. She clicked through slides filled with bright colors and clean graphs. Talked about agility, modernization, removing redundancy, and streamlining communication. Her tone was proud, certain. She spoke like someone who believed every change she was making was the obvious, logical next step. Then came the list. 10 positions eliminated. 5 departments merged. Legacy roles dissolved. Veteran names removed from leadership tracks. No mention of the experience being lost. No acknowledgement of the decades of knowledge walking out the door. She used words like evolution and optimization, but what I heard was erasure. I watched the faces around me. Some nodded, others stiffened. A few looked down at their hands. No one looked back at me. I was the ghost in the basement now. But ghosts, as it turns out, sometimes return. Just as she concluded with a triumphant smile, a chime echoed through the room. Everyone's phones vibrated. A company-wide email had just landed. The sender, Legal Affairs. The subject line was short: immediate hold on personnel reassignments pending compliance review. I could feel the shift before anyone said a word. Kara froze mid-sentence. A few people looked up from their screens, whispering. Someone cleared their throat. On the screen behind her, the projector flickered. Kara tried to continue, stumbled, said the timing was unexpected, that there must be a misunderstanding, but the room no longer belonged to her. The power had slipped. I watched her face, searching for recognition, for realization. It didn't come. Not yet. I already knew what the email said. It referenced Clause 14.2, named my signature as a required authorization for executive-level changes. It wasn't loud. It didn't shout. But it cut straight through every polished slide she had shown. I turned to leave before the questions started. Let them scramble. Let them dig. The reckoning had begun, and I didn't have to say a single word. When the call came from the executive floor, I didn't rush. I took the stairs instead of the elevator, steady and slow, like I had all the time in the world. The moment I stepped into the boardroom, the conversation halted. Kara was already seated, posture tight, face too still. Across from her sat the CEO, and beside him, the head of legal, fingers laced. They gestured for me to sit. I nodded, took the chair with a calm I hadn't felt in weeks. The air was thick, but I was steady. I already knew where this was going. The CEO explained the issue. Clause 14.2 had placed all structural changes on indefinite hold. Kara interjected, saying it was outdated, a technicality, surely not meant to apply now. I listened. Then I spoke, each word clear, measured. The clause is standard in every contract I authored. If you wanted change without due process, you should have read the fine print. Kara turned to me, frustration simmering under a strained smile. She asked if I would sign the releases. Let her proceed with the reorg. I smiled back. Polite, but firm. I'm open to collaboration, I told them. But moving forward, I want a formal role. Not in operations, in oversight. The room went quiet. I outlined what I wanted. A new position. Director of Talent Integrity. Independent of her department. With the authority to review and approve any executive changes or restructuring plans. Not to block progress. To safeguard continuity. The CEO leaned back, considering. Kara looked like she'd bitten down on something sour. She tried to protest, saying I was overreaching. But she didn't have leverage anymore. Her strategy had collapsed under the weight of a single clause. He agreed to my terms, said legal would draft the offer by the end of the day. Kara said nothing. She didn't need to. Her silence told me everything. For the first time, she understood. This wasn't about revenge. It was about balance, and she was no longer the only one holding the scales. As I stood to leave, I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I simply walked out the way I came in. Calm, unshaken, and now, with a seat at the table that she couldn't pull out from under me. The new office wasn't grand, but it was mine. A clean corner on the 6th floor, with 2 tall windows and a quiet that felt earned. The walls were bare for now, but the light was good, and when I opened the windows, I could hear the faint hum of the city, instead of the mechanical drone of basement lights. I placed the jade plant on the sill, the one my old assistant had rescued. It had survived the dark, just like I had. There was something poetic about that. I sat down and looked out over the skyline, not in triumph, but in reflection. This wasn't a return. It was a beginning. My first meeting with the executive team felt different this time. I wasn't just a seat at the table. I had a voice. And more importantly, a purpose. I shared my vision for a new initiative, the Legacy Value Program, a formal system to capture the quiet knowledge that too often disappears when people leave. Not just performance metrics, but stories, mentoring footprints, and relationship maps. The human side of institutional memory. I explained how this wasn't about nostalgia. It was about stability. About building resilience through continuity. We had tools for efficiency. What we lacked was a way to preserve wisdom. They listened. Some nodded. A few asked questions. But no one dismissed it. Kara was there, silent for most of it. She didn't challenge me. She didn't have to. The contrast was enough. Just weeks ago, I was filing boxes. Now I was designing frameworks that would shape the company's future long after either of us moved on. I didn't create this role to get even. I created it because the gaps I once filled without recognition had become too wide to ignore. And now, I could fill them on purpose. With structure. With strategy. With care. As I walked back to my office that afternoon, I passed people who used to glance through me. They stopped now, said hello, asked questions, small things. But they meant more than applause. That day, I didn't think about Kara. I didn't think about what had been taken. I thought about what I was building. And for the first time in a long while, I felt not just seen, but useful in the way that really matters. The kind that lasts. Kara came to my office late in the day, after most people had left. She didn't knock, just stepped in quietly, and stood by the door like she wasn't sure she belonged. I looked up from my notes and waited. She asked why I hadn't taken everything from her when I had the chance. Why hadn't I used Clause 14.2 to push her out for good? I let the silence sit between us for a moment. Then I told her the truth. Because removing her wouldn't have fixed anything. The real win wasn't about getting even. It was about building something better than the system that tried to discard me. She blinked but didn't argue. Not this time. She said she didn't understand why I would help a company that buried me. I said maybe they didn't bury me. Maybe they planted me. And it took hitting bottom to realize what kind of roots I actually had. That kind of growth doesn't need revenge. It needs vision. She shifted her weight, looked at the floor, said she underestimated me. I nodded and told her I knew that. Everyone did. That's why it hurt the way it did. But pain is just information if you know how to use it. And I had finally decided to use mine for something permanent. She asked what I wanted out of all this. If I were trying to prove something, I said I wasn't trying anymore. I had already proved it. Not with words, but with what I built, when no one was looking. She didn't reply, just nodded once, and left quietly. When the door closed, I exhaled. Not in relief, in release. That chapter was done. And not because she lost, but because I had finally stopped needing to win. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. It looked different now. Or maybe I did. The thought came to me softly, but clearly. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't to burn bridges. It's to build the kind that only you can walk across. And then keep walking. Because your value was never in what they gave you. It was in what you carried all along.